and welcome to Beulah Presbyterian Church. This is We are thrilled to be here and looking forward to once again performing as part of Beulah Presbyterian's Music on the Hill series in February. So we hope to see you then. It's going to be an evening full of Disney tunes, and so it should be really fun. Bring lots of little ones, come and enjoy the concert. Tonight's program is designed to honor a very special person in Pittsburgh, and a particularly special person to this organization, Dr. Eugene Reichenfeld. The world of classical music revolves around the mentor-apprenticeship relationship. As a student of classical music, perhaps the most important decision that you make is in the choosing of your private teacher. With that choice begins your lineage. For professional musicians, the first questions that they ask each other is, who was your teacher? When I arrived in Pittsburgh in 1992, I was very active on the freelance scene, performing throughout Pittsburgh, West Virginia, and Ohio. Whenever I asked people who they studied with an overwhelming number, they began their lineage with Eugene Reichenfeld. I was not only surprised by the number of musicians who had studied with him, but also by the level of their playing. They were always the finest players in the group. This whole cycle was repeated 10 years later when I began to teach in the public school system. Almost every notable teacher had had Eugene Reichenfeld as their mentor. There are many stories about Dr. Reichenfeld's lessons. He was clearly systematic, meticulous, and passionate. His students had the best bow arms and great intonation. They knew how to address a problem in a part and how to solve it technically. They understood the style of the music that they were playing, and he got them to connect with that music. They speak of a passion that was an infection and a need to get it right for Dr. Reichenfeld. I can tell you today that I can pick out Reichenfeld students when I hear them play. I used to be able to pick out students of my teachers, Zvi Zeitlin, and I found that I had this thing in common with them because they have a sound that you very rarely hear anymore in terms of a consistent quality of knowing when and how to use a bow appropriately. In 1954, Dr. Reichenfeld founded the Wilkinsburg Junior Symphony Orchestra, which was comprised of his students, and also the Wilkinsburg Civic Orchestra, which was a larger full symphonic orchestra. Later, these two groups became the Reichenfeld String Sinfonietta. He conducted the group, both of these groups, for 50 years under a variety of names, until 2004, when his former student, David Zwerg, took it under the new name OPUS 2 String Sinfonietta. And now it is my group. So in this small way, I too have Eugene Reichenfeld in my lineage. Tonight's concert is designed as a brief walk through music history. The importance of composers' teachers and of the composers to each other is reflective of Dr. Reichenfeld's lasting effect on his students. I should also tell you that it's reflective of him saying to me every time he's come to an OPUS concert, could you please program da-da-da-da-da-da. And they're always the great classics, the things that I always think are what makes classical music classical music. So tonight we're going to hear many of those pieces. Just as Bach still impacts composers today, Dr. Reichenfeld's impact will be felt for many future generations. So with no further ado, in a tribute to a wonderful teacher and our founder, please welcome our concertmaster, Amber Efforts, to the stage.
Johann Sebastian Bach is considered by many to be the father of Western classical music tradition, although that wasn't necessarily true during his own lifetime, when he was known as a conservative, old-fashioned composer, and his fame rested more on his virtuosity as an organist than on his own compositions. In fact, when he was hired for his final position in Leipzig, one of the town council members wrote, "Since the best musicians aren't available, we must select a mediocre one." How embarrassingly wrong he was. During his life, Western music attained a remarkable level of energy and inventiveness that's not only attributed to Bach, but also laid the groundwork for Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven. Despite this intense period of creativity, composers of the 18th century still were heavily influenced by their patrons. Bach's music reflects this dance between his own creativity and the need to satisfy the desires of his patron. This is seen clearly in his Brandenburg Concerti, all written while Bach was Kapellmeister at Cothen between 1717 and 1723. In this position, he had no official relationship with the church, so his music was primarily secular. But he also had his own orchestra, and written for that orchestra, Brandenburg 6 is unusual in that Bach omits the violins from the instrumentation. Of course, in our rendition, we not only welcome them back, we're giving them some of the solo lines. The rhythmic drive and creative use of instrumental forces in this movement shows Bach's inventive spirit that serves as the start of classical music's lineage. As Max Riger once wrote, Bach is the beginning and the end of all music. classical music world is that of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and his father, Leopold. Leopold sincerely felt that it was his God-given obligation to develop his son's abilities and to exhibit them to the world. Therefore, in 1763, he began the first of many triumphant and highly publicized exhibitions of his talented son. The precocious genius Wolfgang Amadeus, at age 6, performed his own as well as others' works on several instruments. He improvised and played sight-difficult compositions for audiences that included many of Europe's nobility. Leopold Mozart was, in his own right, an extraordinary teacher who left treatises about how to teach and play the violin that are still used today. His relationship with his son was complicated and is probably best summarized in the New Grove Dictionary of Musicians. A man of broad cultural achievement, Leopold Mozart may have been haughty, difficult to please, and at times intractable. But a careful reading in the context of the family letters reveals a father who cared deeply for his son, but who was frequently frustrated in his greatest ambition to secure for Wolfgang a worldly position appropriate to his genius. The complexities of this relationship can be heard in Mozart's music, perhaps most notably in his Symphony No. 25. Mozart, who was not yet 18, wrote this symphony at the end of a busy year. He and his father had spent part of the summer of 1773 in Vienna, where Mozart dashed off many pages of relatively unimportant music and heard a number of Haydn's works. After he returned to Salzburg in September, he began this symphony that would become the earliest of his compositions to secure a place in modern orchestral repertoire. In the 19th century, it was still little known and rarely performed. But that changed in the following years. With the popularity of the movie Amadeus, this symphony has achieved great notoriety. With his symphony in particular, Mozart made the first decisive step from wunderkind to great composer, and from entertainer to artist. And even at the height of his considerable fame, he never lost his preference to be around playing people. In fact, Haydn's orchestra frequently referred to him as Papa Haydn, a term of affection for a father figure, somebody who willingly gave advice and was generally respected as a musician. Haydn's relationship with Mozart reflected this same sense of camaraderie. Haydn considered Mozart a friend rather than a student or a competitor. And the feeling was clearly mutual. In 1785, Mozart composed a series of 6 quartets that were clearly influenced by Haydn's 33 quartets and dedicated them to his dear friend, Papa Haydn. Born 18 years before the death of Bach, Haydn's life straddled the Baroque and classical eras. His training in a formal style endowed him with a great gift for counterpoint in the style of Bach that he incorporated into the emergent classical style of melody with accompaniment. Technically, Haydn didn't invent the symphony, but in fact, he developed it from the entertainment piece of the Baroque into the dominant form of composition found in the classical period. He did essentially the same thing for the emerging string quartet. In both genres, he passed along fully worked out models for Mozart and Beethoven and virtually all composers since. Haydn's Symphony 104 is one of his final works and reflects the mature classical style and sets the stage for the emotional exploration of the Romantic era. The first movement opens with a starkly dramatic adagio, stated in unison. This ripping theme alternates with quiet passages whose emotionally intense harmonies reinforce the feeling of a powerful command for the audience to sit up and take notice. After this riveting statement, Haydn shifts gears and delivers a scintillating and disarmingly graceful allegro to calm and raise the spirits. If Bach began Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, then Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven beget all of the composers of the Romantic era. The importance of these men lies primarily in their development of lasting new forms of instrumental music. Together, these three musicians, who were also personally acquainted with each other, set instrumental music on an equal footing with vocal music. Tchaikovsky's music reflects this pure intention of romantic instrumental music. His music is marked by an expression of emotion through extended harmonies, beautiful melodies, and large dynamic contrasts. As with many composers of the Romantic era, Tchaikovsky strove to tell a story or evoke an image through his music. It's hard to believe that music so blazing as Capriccio Italien could have been written when its creator was locked in the throes of a disabling depression. In the shattering aftermath of an ill-advised 3-week marriage in 1877, Tchaikovsky fled Moscow and lived for extended periods of time in Switzerland and France and Italy. Understandably, his creativity suffered. The quality of his work fell off, and he had to force himself to compose. True inspiration came only intermittently during those difficult years. He spent the winter of 1880 in Rome, and like millions of others, he fell in love with that city. It was carnival season, and life blazed around him. Crowds and dancers and fireworks, music, the smell of food, all these were part of his impressions of the Eternal City. Suddenly, he felt like composing again, and soon after his arrival, he began writing Capriccio Italien. He wrote, "I'm working on a sketch of an Italian fantasia based on folk songs. Thanks to the charming themes, some of which I've heard in the streets, the work will be effective." As we head into winter, we hope that you'll enjoy the sunny sounds of Tchaikovsky's Capriccio Italien. and shows the impact that composers from previous centuries still have on recent music. From the driving rhythm that recalls Bach's Brandenburg No. 6, to the phrasing that recalls Mozart and Haydn, to the depiction of a scene found in Tchaikovsky, Hinastera is the product of all that have come before him. In his lineage, he holds all the great composers of the past. Danza Finale is the last of 4 dances in Hinastera's ballet, Estancia. Now, an estancia is a large cattle ranch on the Pampas in Argentina, and Alberto Hinastera envisioned his ballet as a depiction of the busy activities on an estancia from one dawn to the next. The story of the ballet is built around a love triangle. A city boy meets a beautiful ranch girl and is entranced. She, however, considers him to be a weakling in comparison to the manly gauchos or horsemen who work on her father's estancia. The city boy follows her to the ranch, determined to win her heart away from the gauchos. Hinastera wrote this ballet very early in his career, and during those early years he was fascinated with Argentinian folk song. And Estancia's score is filled with mere quotes of actual folk tunes. Now, Malambo is a quick and vigorous Argentinian folk dance in which men compete to demonstrate their agility and machismo. The dance itself is a series of competitive, anything you can do, I can do better moments. The winner is the last man standing. And in the final movement of the suite, Hinastera uses this Malambo format to show the city man competing with the gauchos for the heart of his ranch girl. time to thank all of the board members who work so tirelessly for this organization. And we also want to thank you, our audience, for coming this evening and hope you enjoyed the concert. As you leave tonight, you will notice that there are baskets by the doorway. We do take donations at the end of the concert. These funds help underwrite the cost of OPUS, but they also provide scholarships for our graduating seniors. We want to thank you in advance for your generous support and sure hope we see you in our February concert. We look forward to it. Good night.